King Krule is an artist I have liked since the beginning. I thought he's displayed quite a lot of talent in the singer-songwriter field, and I think his debut album really displayed that, had some fantastic songs on there, probably some of his best to date. I really did like The Ooze, which came out in 2017 when it came out, but I don't know if I like it as much these days. I don't really ever have an urge to go back to it, even though I do think it is a very good album. I'm just not really as I'm just not rushing to hear it, but I think like songs like Biscuit Town and Dumb Surfer are freaking great. So he's definitely always had a lot of talent. I think he has a really interesting voice. The tone of his voice just has such a strange appeal to it that I think it just makes him stand out from many of his other contemporaries at the moment. I think it's also a bit of an acquired taste, but I do think he offers something really unique in the way that he sings. The thing that I find to be a bit of an issue with this album here, The Man Alive, is that his vocal performances are quite woozy and a bit like drugged up at times, sort of like he's just kind of like slurring out a lot of his words. He's singing in his really deep baritone voice over these incredibly like, I guess, endless instrumentals, directionless instrumentals. It doesn't start off that way though. I mean, the first few tracks definitely have way more bite to them and way more energy to them, which I think I prefer Archy's voice over these types of art punk, jazzy, twisted, messed up instrumentals. I think his voice is made for this kind of music. But then we hit a sea change at about track 5 or 6. You hit the really short Dream, which is incredibly underwhelming to me, coming right after Comet Face, which I think is probably the album's best song. And from there on out, there's just no turning back. I mean, the demented sounds, the twisted nature of a song like Stoned Again, which is just a complete mess, but it is a really interesting listen. Just feels like a lifetime ago, because everything else from there on out is just so slowly paced and dragged out that you just almost forget the first few tracks. If for whatever reason I hadn't checked the length of this album through the many times I've played it, and you said to me, oh yeah, it's like an hour and 5 minutes long, I think I'd just nod along and agree with you, because it certainly feels like it goes on much longer than it actually does. I just find it really difficult to connect to the vocal performances on tracks like Airport, Antenatal, Airplane, and Slinky. I just find the music to be so dull, and Archie's deep voice matching with these instrumentals to be somewhat disconnected. I just don't really feel like there's a connect between what he's going for in his singing and what the music itself is going for. These tracks to me sound like they're fit for someone who has a different voice. I just don't know if King Krule really manages to capture the essence or the atmosphere that he's really trying to go for when he has that kind of tone to his voice. It just doesn't really work for me. I think the opening track, and I've already mentioned Stoned Again as well, and Comet Face, these are the tracks that display his best strengths. These weird, jazzy, almost strange experimental instrumentals, the punk elements to them as well, the really oddness about them just really depicts how he sings. Like, he always sounds like he's singing in such a weird way, and the only way that you can make his voice work incredibly well is by using these kinds of instrumentals. But for so much of the runtime on this album, I'm just hearing an artist who doesn't sound like they're playing to their best strengths. But I think it was most probably an artistic decision on Archie's part to make the album like this, because you do get a lot of deeper insight into the state of his mind on a lot of these tracks, you know, tracks like Don't Let the Dragon Drag On. This track has this idea that, you know, you're depressed at home, you're alone, and then there's this dragon outside kind of keeping you captive because you can't leave the house or the dragon will get you, so you're essentially just trapped in this state for eternity because there's no way of exiting this. And I think it's tracks like these that really appeal to King Krule fans the most, because he does have a really interesting and unique way of looking into the deeper states of his mind and this depressed nature as well, that he just really paints a really vivid picture of throughout most of his songs. And of course, I can't go on without mentioning the fact that Archie is now a father. About this time last year, he became a dad, so there are some references to that on this album. I think Alone, Omen 3 might be one of the most on the nose references to that, as he's saying how this person is never alone. Sometimes you're stretched, but you're never going to be alone. Surely talking about his daughter here, I mean, he could also actually be talking to the mother of the child, in the sense that she'll never be alone and he'll always be there to protect his daughter with her. The closing track is an interesting one though, because he's directly pleading to a girl to complete him, and you're not entirely sure who it is. But again, with the way he's talking about how the world is empty and there's just no promise in the world, there's nothing that's filled with hope. Maybe he's directly talking to his daughter to kind of fill that void that isn't there for him anywhere else. He's talking about how everything is numb, everything lets him down all the time, but maybe the one thing that could change that in his life is in fact his daughter. I definitely think there's a lot to unpack here, especially for people that love this album, because if you're loving the sound of this album, then of course you're gonna probably look into the lyrics and love them as well. But for me, as I've mentioned, just so much of the music does nothing for me, to the point where even lyrically I'm just not sure if there's enough here to completely captivate me or engage me from the whole, from start to finish, basically. I think the album demonstrates a lot of potential early on, but really quickly squanders that potential and trails off into the unknown by like track 5 or 6, which I think that point of the album is definitely, again, an artistic decision on King Krule's part, but it just doesn't really interest me or isn't particularly enjoyable to listen to. It is making me question how much I truly do like the Ooze, because I think stylistically they're quite similar albums. I don't think there's that much difference to them generally at all, but we'll see. Maybe I'll go back to it and not enjoy it that much anymore. But I do know I don't really like Man Alive that much, unfortunately. 5 out of 10 from me. Let me know your thoughts on this album, if you think it's much better than I'm giving it credit for. If you think it's about the same, if you think it's worse, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Tell me your favourite King Krule album. I would probably say his debut album, to be honest. Yeah, his debut. Thank you for watching my review. Hopefully you have a good day, and subscribe, and goodbye.